Ari Temkin was in Orlando for the Big 12 spring meetings. We've heard from Brett Yormark from earlier today. He was there with Brett Yormark and everyone else and joins us on 365 Sports. It's been an interesting week, sir, with a little turf war, a little pushback, a little oversensitivity, and maybe some saying enough is enough. What's been your take throughout this week, Ari?
Yeah, I mean, these used to be pretty, basic and non-drama filled meetings that they had every year to discuss, whatever perceived issues. And now these spring meetings are pretty substantial and, maybe none more so than this year's spring meetings. But there was obviously a lot of back and forth. I think the Big 12 was pretty steadfast in trying to, figure out its own path. But it's hard to sort of completely ignore the noise you're hearing from Destin and what the SEC was doing. And, look, I hear what the Big 12 is saying about the 5+11 model. We spent a lot of time on our show this week talking about the 4-4-2-2-1 or the 5+11, which all sound ridiculous. And I'd like to believe that the 5+11 would benefit the Big 12 more so than the 2 automatic bids. But I mean, Smokey, you and I have been around long enough to see Oklahoma State get snubbed, to see Baylor get snubbed by a committee. So, I look at it and say, in theory, the 5+11 works better for the playoff, for the future of the playoff for the Big 12. I'm just not sure in practice it's going to work out.
Ari, I think it's the only way the Big 12 and ACC can stop the train of the AQs. They're going to have to show that we're going to give up something here, which is 2 automatic spots. I think it's the only way you can kind of stop the train, because that AQ thing could get really ridiculous and be really bad overall. If you want the 16 best teams, I think you got to bet on yourself a little bit if you're these other conferences. And
I don't disagree with that. In fact, Paul, I agree with you. But we've seen the committee, guys.
Yeah.
We've seen that. This is nothing new for the Big 12. Here's my question to you, both of you. In the next 10 years, in the 5+11, do you think the Big 12 would average more than 2 teams over the next 10 years?
Average? No.
No, Craig just said no, not the average. No.
Right. No. So that's kind of where, having 2 automatic qualifiers out of the Big 12 seems insignificant. Seems like it's not seems like it doesn't matter. And the 5+11 sounds better. But I think, again, if we look at the next decade and we're to guess, my guess is the same. We'd probably average less than 2 teams per season over the next 10 years. So the 4-4-2-2-1 seems like the better model. And at this point now, the SEC seems to be trying to push that direction anyway, so that they feel like they can get 5 bids when push comes to shove.
Yeah, I feel like they're playing chess. Everybody else is playing checkers. I feel like whatever Sankey's saying, do the opposite almost, because he's hoping that you do that. You know what I mean? He's like Mr. Art of War, and he's got this all laid out. And look at the last 2 or 3 years and tell me they don't have some articulate master plan that they've been executing this entire time, where everything eventually does fall their way. I'm with you. I wonder if that's not the Big 12's compromise, though, is we're going to earn it on the field, and we're going to do not what's best for us. We're going to do what's best for college football. And I wonder if that's the message maybe from Yormark is, we're not going to be selfish and fight this. We're just going to do what's greater for the game, because, man, Ari, it does feel like there's the headline today, Big 12 chief, Big 10 SEC must serve all football. We saw Sankey get a little bit in his, I guess, feelings when the good of college football was brought up earlier this week. He's like, that's not my job, but I almost feel like it's Brett Yormark intentionally putting out the good of college football, to keep the onus on the Big 10 and the SEC to ultimately do what's right for the game. What do you think?
Protect your online privacy with NordVPN. Browse securely, access content from anywhere, and keep your data safe with military-grade encryption. Whether at home or on the go, NordVPN ensures your digital freedom. Stay secure. Download NordVPN today at nordvpn.com. That's NORDVPN.com.
Yeah, there's no question that that's why Yormark made those comments. And it certainly wasn't in lockstep with the ACC. But, I mean, the Big 12 doesn't really have a leg to stand on when it comes to leverage here. The SEC is driving the bus. And it appears that Sankey is the mouthpiece for both the SEC and the Big 10, because we haven't really heard anything from Tony Petitti of substance whatsoever. He's just a lapdog, it appears. And so, yeah, I mean, Yormark has to make his intentions known. And I think in doing so, he garners some sympathy. And I mean, look, I think there is a point at which the SEC can, go too far. There is a tipping point here. I mean, the ultimate point is like the SEC or in the Big Ten. We're talking about like 5 teams here in terms of like the power of those conferences. 6 total teams have won the college football playoff over the last 11 years since it was first implemented. 6. And of those 6, 1 is an ACC team. And would you bet on Clemson winning a title in the next 11 years? I certainly wouldn't. Alabama's won a handful of those. Would you bet on Alabama winning a title in the next 10 years? I think maybe more so than Clemson, but I'm not sure about it. Georgia, LSU, Michigan, and Ohio State are the others. So, like, it's kind of amazing how the rest of these schools have lumped themselves in like there's some sort of big bad powerhouse when like the difference between any school in the Big 12 and any school in the ACC and any other school that's not LSU, Georgia, Bama, Michigan, or Ohio State is pretty much in the same exact boat. The only difference being the money difference that those schools then garner now because they're in the SEC and the Big Ten. But no, I mean, I think you're 100% right. And again, in principle, like, yeah, win your way in. But again, I push back on that because we've seen the committee even last year with BYU not even being part of the conversation. Forget about whether or not BYU should have been in. They weren't even part of the conversation. That's the perception game that's being played right now across the media. And the Big 12 has lost seemingly every time that we've seen it. We saw Baylor get snubbed. We saw Oklahoma State get snubbed. To think that won't happen in the future with 11 at-large bids is foolish.
Ari, you're right. I think though that like you can't capitulate to the narrative, right? Because if you do, then you're just going to guarantee yourself that you never will. So this is a much bigger risk, obviously, but the reward is far greater on the other side, which again, this could change in 5 years when the TV deals are up. So this isn't like if this is a 30-year contract, it'd be like, maybe take your 2 automatic bids or whatever, but it's not. So what I think that the pushback has to be, and I know that I've seen you and heard you comment on this, is that the SEC is a propaganda machine. They put out propaganda this week about, the S&P of the whole conference for the last decade. Well, Ari, what does the first 7 years of that decade matter in regard to the last 3 years where the friggin' rules are different?
Yeah, no, you're totally right. I mean, and how funny is that to be arguing about, winning it on the field and then producing some sort of a document that basically goes through the mathematics of why you're so much better than everybody else. Literally the exact opposite of handling it on the field. And it does feel like the SEC is on the defensive a little bit here. And
no doubt about it. And they're frustrated. Yeah.
Yeah. And they need, again, like they're certainly in position of power. And Greg Sankey is absolutely trying to secure his own conference's future. But like, you cannot alienate such a large majority of the country. And that's where like everybody's saying, oh, it's going to this massive, conference. And that's what it's going to be, the super conference. And I don't know. It almost seems like where we are now in terms of public perception and everything, that there's like pushback on that and realizing just how bad that would be overall, because, the Lakers need the Utah Jazz. They need the San Antonio Spurs. You need the Oklahoma City Thunder, right? Like the NBA, Major League Baseball can't just have the Yankees play the Yankees every day. You can't just have the Yankees play the Dodgers every game. You can't just say, well, we're the bigger market, we're the bigger brand, we should get everything, and not realize that like maybe individually some schools don't quote unquote matter, but collectively in the aggregate, those schools absolutely matter because it's such a large percentage of the population that forever have cared about your sport because of the notion that there is an end that they can have to winning a national championship, as far-fetched as that might actually be.
Yeah, it's not an exact comparison, but when they tried the whole European Super League, like a lot of people have drawn some parallels to that. Yeah. And I do think it was public outcry ultimately that crushed that. And I think that could be similar here of like the public's just got to be vocal, and also the politicians that could get involved. Those are like the 2 Ps I feel like that are like the only barriers from this just going full steam ahead. But I guess we'll see how that plays out. What did you think of the pause on private equity? Did that have any particular meaning to you one way or the other?
Yeah, I mean, not really. certainly you look at that as a potential exploratory area for the Big 12, because the Big 12 needs to figure out revenue streams, but more than that, revenue streams that the Big 12, the Big 10 of the SEC won't touch. And I think private equity is probably in that lane. In reading between the lines of what Dave Rumsey wrote about for Front Office Sports, it appears that the board is not ready to move forward on it, meaning I think Brett Yormark got pushback on it. And maybe it's not even Yormark's job to say that they should go in one direction or the other, but just to present the information. But, I can tell you that Yormark did visit with multiple private equity firms. They got a presentation, they shopped it around, and probably worked out what would be the best deal for them. And at this point, it appears that the board has said no, that the athletic directors, the chancellors involved have said no. So stay tuned on that. I also wonder too, does the Big 12 look to do a private equity deal for the conference as opposed to maybe, helping one work through for the schools? Because I think there's two folds to that. There's the Big 12 making a bet and an investment, but then there's also the conferences or the schools themselves. My guess is the private equity money is mostly wanting the schools themselves because the Big 12 is disposable.
This private equity thing is going to be interesting to watch how it eventually seeps into what's going to be college athletics. We know that's going to happen. So let me ask you this. This might have been from my dad a long, long time ago, and I didn't always listen to him, that when somebody is speaking or coming at you that you don't think is at your level, just ignore them. It'll drive them crazy. They didn't do that this week, did they, with Sankey? He is bothered by what was said or released last week. And it is kind of funny. There's still, we know, the 800-pound gorilla along with the Big Ten. But now you're seeing Brett Bielema make comments about the SEC strength. Petiti continues to say nothing, which is brilliant. It is a little bit of infighting on what they're going to do, and also 9 conference games, crossover games, etc.
And there's also, to that point, Smokey, there's also so much going on. I mean, there's the playoff, which is sort of galvanized the headlines here. But I mean, you're also at this point waiting for a settlement to come down. It was supposed to be early April. So here we are nearly 2 months fully later, and we still don't have that. So meanwhile, all these preparations are underway in what's going to happen following that, that settlement. But at this point, there's no settlement. So how do you react to a settlement and start, moving forward without the settlement even being finalized? And, and so like, there's so many other pieces to this. There's the transfer portal stuff, a lot of that's coming out about the potential one transfer portal. So, I mean, yeah, it's a lot to navigate. And I think that's why from the Big 12's perspective, like, I think it's a brilliant move by Yormark to not directly address it, but also like there's just so much going on. They're so busy. Like they were in meetings. They had the football coaches in these meetings yesterday for 5 hours straight, like just boom, 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 boom. Lots of things going on. And then as soon as we presented what TuneIn has been doing with the Big 12, like they took off and left after that. So, and they did that earlier in the week with the men's basketball coaches and the athletic directors, the women's basketball coach, the athletic directors. But it was Yormark meeting individually with the football coaches, without the athletic directors, without the chancellors. So I thought that was really interesting too. But there's so much they've got to tackle. There's so much to go on that's going on. I think Yormark is super busy and trying to generate revenue streams and ones that he can get through with board approval. We saw the WWE stuff, so he continues to dig further on the intellectual property stuff, which is great. So the Big 12 has the right man at the controls, and I think you're absolutely right about the way in which the battle from the media perspective is being waged. And right now, it looks like the Big 12 is the bigger man, so to speak.
Yeah, Ari, it's weird that you have to fight. They're not really fighting fire with fire, obviously, but they are like, this is the only thing they can do because they don't have the backing. So you just have to have a unified message, which clearly the SEC actually doesn't have right now. The execs are saying one thing, Sankey's saying everything, the coaches want one thing, so the SEC has its own issues of trying to figure out who they want to be too.
So does the Atlantic Coast Conference.
Yeah.
I mean, for once, the Big 12 is the most unified conference in all of college sports. We could thank Texas and Oklahoma for that, right? Like, I think we all thought at first, oh no, they're leaving. That's our cash cow. And what we come to realize now is, man, they were the ones getting in the way of some semblance of uniformity, right? I mean, like one of the things that we were talking about at the meetings this week was like, what happened if the Big 12 would have just let Texas and Oklahoma walk to the Pac-12? Would A&M still be in the conference? Would Colorado, would Missouri? I mean, Colorado's back, but you know what I mean? Like, would Texas and Oklahoma have left and the conference would have stayed whole? And what would it look like? And I think like a big part of that exercise is just understanding that like the ACC has skewed their conference right now in the same way that the Big 12 did to placate to Texas and Oklahoma. The ACC is doing that in order to survive, but they're going to deal with the same fate that the Big 12 did once Clemson, Florida State, and the big powers there realize that whatever they think they're getting in addition to what other ACC schools are getting is not nearly as much as they need in order to keep up. And that only, by the way, tilts in the favor of the Big 12, versus the ACC in the years moving forward. So, I mean, it is really a breath of fresh air that, like, actually one of the biggest weaknesses of the conference, quote unquote, and losing Texas and Oklahoma has become a huge and pretty significant strength for this conference, because you don't have to deal with people that demand and entities that demand more than what everybody's getting. Everybody's equal partners. Everybody's in terms of involvement, equally involved. Yormark, I think, is speaking to all different sports at a level of trying to continue the involvement there. So, yeah, I mean, and I think, Paul, what you pointed out is really astute in that, like, you hear a unified message that's coming out from the Big 12. You don't hear coaches going rogue and saying something completely different or inarticulate, inconsistent with what the Big 12 brass is saying. Like Brett Yormark mentioned, we like the 5+11 format, and then every athletic director or football coach we had on after the fact mentioned that as well. And yeah, we're not seeing that in the SEC. We're not seeing that in the ACC. We're seeing different messaging. We're not seeing a unified message. So I think there's a lot of strength in that for the Big 12. And it's something that, was very elusive for this conference for a long time.
Oh, Texas is in something and there's not agreement?
Yeah. Craig?
I feel like the Big Ten is like Oklahoma in your scenario, though, Paul, where we've mentioned SEC, ACC,
totally.
Big 12. Big Ten's
no
just
doubt.
sitting there,
Yeah.
and everybody also blames Texas, and Oklahoma is just as guilty.
Yeah.
And I say that as an Oklahoma fan. It's just it's amazing how
They
Katie's just
skirted,
sitting back, man.
Yeah, they skirted any kinds of. I mean, Texas took all of the bullets, and Oklahoma did the exact same thing. They just followed Texas out the door. And you're right. But in this case, the Big Ten is sort of sliding by here, and just kind of a side mention to it. And I do wonder if Sankey and Petitti got together and were like, I'll be the mouthpiece. You kind of just be my lapdog, or if he's just acquiescing to the alpha here. But it is a bizarre set of circumstances. And ultimately, like, Sankey is the villain here. And he's, from a public perception standpoint, being played out that way, which may be a surprise. But he doesn't want to be a villain. He's a reluctant villain. And I think that's why when you push back against that, like, LeBron was also a reluctant villain. And what happens in that case? You become the villain anyways. You look worse off for trying not to be. So I think Sankey's kind of in that position right now.
This is totally off topic, but what do you think about Nigel Kennedy and Texas Tech up there in the College World Series? Big win, and just what do you make of this run? I mean, obviously, big investment on Tech that's well documented, but hey, this was what you intended, was to be in the College World Series and try to win a national championship. Right.
I mean, if there is in one sport where one player can make that much of a difference, it is a pitcher in softball. And so in that case, Nigel Kennedy is worth every penny. In fact, she's probably underpaid. I mean, she's dominant. What a fun game to watch last night. And, going back to the strength of this conference, like Texas and Oklahoma are going to play in a College World Series game tomorrow night. And then the winner takes on the winner of Oregon and Texas Tech. So how about that? And I mean, those were the two powers in this conference, along with Oklahoma State. I know Baylor's had some good years in softball, but the conference is starting to really see other, where the conference was buoyed, it seemed, in most sports by Texas and Oklahoma. Like, man, we thought baseball, what a loss that's going to be. Again, Baylor's had some good years in baseball, and Tech, and there's Oklahoma State. Like, there's been good teams, but to get 8 bids for this conference, including Cincinnati and Kansas, man, what an incredible run for this conference in other sports where you thought they're going to miss a lot without Texas and Oklahoma, and softball is certainly front and center for that. And the last thing I'll say on this is one of the more interesting things we talked about with some of the athletic directors at media days at spring meetings was, how do you budget? How are you looking at where you're going to be spending your money? And I mean, Terry Mohajir put it perfectly. He said, every dollar spent elsewhere is a dollar that's not going towards football. And so you're going to have to obviously spend the majority of your money in football, but Texas Tech's in a really good position for this conference overall, because they're spending at football, they're spending at softball, they're spending across the board in all sports. And again, the strength of this Big 12, would be hurting right now without a Texas Tech in the College World Series. So that's also interesting to me. Athletic directors have to make bets now in the sports that they really want to support. And I think it's not all like as black and white as it might appear. Like if somebody like a Nigeri Canada becomes available and you can have her at a price point, like that's an investment that's worth something even if you haven't invested in softball previously. So that part of this, capitalism has finally been introduced in college sports. And so now athletic directors are trying to make it all work within their budgets.
All right, man. Good stuff, Ari. Glad you got back. Appreciate your time today. I know you got to go. Appreciate your time. We'll talk to you again soon.
Take care, guys. Always great. Appreciate you.
Thank you.